Well, there you have another episode of Straight Outta Combat Radio, audio medicine by Green Zone Hero. This United States Army Ranger veteran is out to break the stigma of psychedelics. He is the founder and president of Heroic Hearts Project. His story is significant in today's world. He's not a drug pusher. He is a person that's helping people to rebuild their lives through their own traumas. Have a lot of respect for this Army Ranger. And have a lot of respect for you, too, to continue to listen to our show, Straight Outta Combat Radio. You're going to enjoy this episode. Thank you.
You're a steely-eyed killer shadow in the night. You were born to fight. You gotta light 'em up.
My name is John Krotek, and I want to welcome you to Straight Outta Combat Radio, audio medicine by Green Zone Hero. We're here to honor the wisdom of America's most valuable asset for combat veterans. We're authentic, we're empowering, we're American.
Save us all before they burn it down.
Our guest for this episode of Straight Outta Combat Radio, audio medicine by Green Zone Hero, is former United States Army Ranger and president of the Heroic Hearts Project, Jesse Gould. Happy to have him here today. He is the founder and the president of this organization, which is a nonprofit pioneering psychedelic therapies for military veterans. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that formed. But anyhow, after being deployed in Afghanistan 3 times, he founded this organization in 2017 to spearhead the acceptance and use of ayahuasca therapy as a means of addressing the current mental health crisis among veterans, which is a huge, huge project. We're going to talk more about that too. The Heroic Hearts Project so far has raised over $150,000 in sponsorships from donors, including Dr. Bronner's, and has partnered with the world's leading ayahuasca treatment centers, as well as sponsoring psychiatric applications with the University of Colorado in Boulder and the University of Georgia. Jesse helps shape treatment programs and spreads awareness of plant medicine as a therapeutic method. He has spoken globally about psychedelics and mental health and received accolades, including being recognized as one of the social entrepreneurs to watch for in 2020 by Cause Artists. Driven by a mission to help military veterans struggling with mental trauma, he is best known for his own inspiring battle with PTSD and his own recovery through ayahuasca treatment. Jesse's work can be seen and heard at New York Times, Breaking Convention, San Francisco Psychedelic Liberty Summit, People of Purchase, The Freak, Psychedelics Today podcast, Kyle Kingsbury podcast, Cause Artists, WAMU 88.5, and The Growth Op. Wow, that's an impressive bio, Jesse. And all I can tell you is I'm very humbled and honored to have you here on Straight Outta Combat Radio. Hey, Jesse.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here. I'm glad we finally connected. I know it was a little bit back and forth, and especially with everything going on right now, it's nice to connect and maybe distract our attentions from the current issues.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We're right in the middle of this pandemic, and you're so right. Well, if we're going to be distracted, it's good that we're distracted to hear your story, because the things that you're doing are just absolutely incredible and so badly needed. And there's more and more of this information out there. But what you're doing with the Heroic Hearts Project, that keeps like a tongue twister, is just absolutely phenomenal. But before we get there, tell us a little bit about the Gould family. Where did you grow up, and who were your mentors, and how did you even make it to the U.S. Army Ranger School?
Yeah, of course. My path has always been and continues to be not, the straightest arrow. It deviates, but within that, different excursions, different experience in life, it's formed me of who I am, and learned a lot in each spot. So my parents are separated, and I grew up in between Florida, a small town called New Smyrna Beach, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. So my sister and I went back and forth there. My dad is a lawyer. My sister is currently a lawyer. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom and just did a lot of various jobs. She now has some apartments. But, even though they're separated, they're a very loving family, always very supportive. My own path, I was originally in finance. I went to Cornell University, got a degree in economics. I was fortunate enough to graduate in 2009 at the heart of the previous economic crisis. So,
exactly. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
I just have that sort of luck following me, I guess. So, but I was in a boutique investment bank. I was right during that crisis. It was another sort of crazy, perilous time. Nobody really knew what was next. And it was around that time I knew that I wanted to join the military. It was just this growing energy, that alpha sort of thing in your soul, the spirit that you can't ignore after a while. And, I made the jump of like, I can delay the professional side, but I cannot delay this drive to join the military because, it's a young man's game, especially if you want to go into special operations. There's a lot of wear and tear on your body, and just even to get in, you kind of have to be at your peak. And so I knew it was the time. I knew everything else could be on hold.
Did you have anybody in the background in your family that had been prior military?
It really wasn't a military family. My grandfather did serve. Both grandfathers, actually. My one grandfather was in the Dutch resistance during World War II, and my other grandfather was a Marine who served in the Pacific. He was a mechanic. But neither. Well, my Dutch grandfather unfortunately passed away before I was of age, and my other grandfather never really spoke about it. He was definitely haunted by it, but it was never really brought up. There was not really military memorabilia anywhere. It was a very unmilitary family. So, that wasn't really a push to it.
You had the calling, man.
Yeah, and I felt very fortunate. I felt fortunate coming from a pretty humble means, being able to go to a great university and being able to have all these opportunities in front of me. And it's because of the country, the system of, that's not possible everywhere else. And in my mind, it's you have to give back to something greater than yourself at least one point in your life to hold that humility and respect for things around you.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. So here you are, Cornell University graduate, and it's right after the big debacle, the end of 2008, 2009, and the beginning of it actually. But where did you go for your basic training? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so just like I said, I decided to go. It was a big shock to everybody, including my family, my boss. I think my boss tried to bribe me not to go, but like we said, it was something I had to do. I knew I'd end up at an old age and very regretful if I didn't. Just went to the recruiter. The recruiter had no idea about Rangers, so he told me all these long tales, but fortunately I did my research. Actually ended up getting a slot pretty quickly. So within a month of going to the recruiter, I was heading to Fort Benning, scared there with all the other new recruits. In my contract, I got the direct route. So did basic training, went straight to airborne, then went to, it was one of the first classes of what they call RASP before it was RIP. So RASP is Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. And so it's kind of a combination. It was RIP, but then an add-on so that people that got through it would have a little bit more skills once they got to their battalion. So I went through that. It lived up to all the nightmarish tales, but fortunately I was able to push through and persevere.
Oh, so can you share one thing that happened maybe in Ranger School that you just went, holy cow, I mean, am I going to make it? Or you went, holy cow, I'm going to make it?
Well, so this was before Ranger School. So give it to the Army to make things as confusing as possible with the naming. So the way the whole Ranger program works is to even be considered a Ranger and get into a Ranger platoon, you have to go through the selection process, which is RIP or RASP. And then once you are, if you pass that and then you go to a Ranger platoon, or Ranger Battalion, then if you prove yourself there once again, after about a year, maybe earlier, you have the opportunity to go to Ranger School. So Ranger School is like a leadership school. Everybody in the Army can do it, but it's essential for people in Ranger to go to Ranger School. So if you want to become a leader, if you want to be promoted to sergeant, it's absolute. Everybody who are infantry in Ranger Battalion have to go to the Ranger School. So that's like down the line. So it's like the future prospect of even more suffering.
Man.
And I'd say like one of the hardest days in RASP was the within 3 days, just because the first 8-week program, the first week is very physical. It's all about cutting out people who just can't hack it on a mental, physical basis. So just long runs, very intense. Anything you take for granted in terms of comfort, it's taken away from you in some sort of means and fashion. And that first Wednesday, I went in there with a couple of guys who were really close friends, and we, made one of those pacts of, hey, we're not going to quit this. If anybody quits, talk to the other people before you go. And I woke up one morning and everybody else that I came there with had quit just because it got to them. And so, not only was I dealing with my own demons and struggles through this process, but then all of a sudden I found myself completely alone. And so it was just, this very hard-hitting day. And that was the one day where I was like, hey, I'm going to keep pushing. I don't know if I can make it, but I'm not going to quit. It's either they're going to have to wheel me out through an ambulance or something. But fortunately, I was able to persevere and get past it, barely by the skin of my teeth, but I got through.
Well, congratulations on that. So what was the graduation like for that?
The graduation, I think like most military graduations, by the time you're there, you're almost annoyed at the graduation because it's all about like the friends and family, which is great that they have that there. But at that point, you're just like, oh man, more DNC, more drill and ceremony. You have to do all the practices for the graduation. It takes like a whole day. So you're doing, just to have the appearance to your friends and family, you're just doing the same routine over and over again. And it's exhausting. After you feel accomplished, it really drains it out of you. But on the tail end of that, once it was all said and done, my father, my sister, and some really good friends that I've known since childhood were there. We drove up to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and just had like a very great weekend where, I was on top of the world, obviously, after that.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. So you graduate and you get off to your first duty station. Where did you go?
I was stationed at 175, so 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment in Savannah, Georgia. And I was in the mortar platoon. It was a little trick Uncle Sam put on us.
Oh, Uncle Sam playing tricks, really?
Yeah. So they gave us the 11 X-ray MOS designator, and what they didn't tell us was that was like a lottery system where you could either be a Bravo, which is the straight line infantry, or 11 Charlie, which is infantry with a mortar add-on. And so I was literally in processing, and they divided the room in half. And because of being on that one side, I was instantly a mortar, which was interesting. I mean, like I said, at the end of the day, it wasn't the path I chose. It wasn't the one I expected, but it was one that I think gave me the most character.
So where did you go to mortar school? Was it there in Savannah?
No, the mortars happened right after basic training. So we had a 15-week basic training. So I think it was 2 additional weeks to the normal. And so you just had to qualify there. And then in Savannah, when I was in Ranger platoon, we just had to do additional training to get to the SOPs of Ranger Battalion of how they do mortars. And so it was interesting, but the mortar platoon and Ranger is definitely the redheaded stepchild. And so there's a lot of self-loathing there, and there's a lot of, no matter what, it's just a very competitive environment. And so everybody's looking for a way to put other people down, but the competition it depends on how you handle it, right? You can either be stronger from it and use that competition to your advantage, or you can let it get to you. And so fortunately, I liked it. I liked being the underdog in a certain situation. And when I was able to become a leader, I instilled that in my guys and use that to help them make themselves the best people possible. The mortars tended to be known as like maybe dumb, maybe some rock eaters, but on the other side, they knew their stuff, and they could just, given our skill set, we always carried all the heavy equipment. And so when we worked with the line platoons, we were the ones that were able to cover down and help out and carry the excess and just really be a value added to whoever we were attached to.
That's pretty cool. I like the way you described that. So where was your first deployment?
All three were in Afghanistan. The first one was pretty interesting. The first year I was there, I got there right when the way the Ranger platoon works. There's three. There might be four now. I can't remember, but there definitely was three at that time, and they just alternated in terms of deployment. So each one would be there about 5 months, come back, the next one would go, and that's kind of what made, to this day, Ranger Regiment one of the longest continuously serving regiments there is in the Army, because it's just been constant. So people who I have a good buddy who was in for 20 years and he has 15 deployments under his belt of pretty high intensity action. So for me, I got there right when people were coming back, so it gave me some time to fit in and learn all the protocols and prove myself once again, as happens in the military. You're always, once you get to the next level, you're at the bottom of that next level, and so you have to work your way up. And so I was able to learn a lot of the skills. I ended up going into something called the fire direction control, which is really sort of the mind or the computers behind the mortars. So you learn the system, you learn how the mortar operates. For people who aren't familiar, it's a high angle trajectory explosive.
What's the range on the ones you guys had?
Oh, you're giving me knowledge. I'm probably gonna get this wrong and get some shit from my guys. So the biggest one was the 120 millimeter. And so those were some pretty big mortars, some pretty big explosive munitions, and they weighed about 30 to 40 pounds a piece, just to give you an idea. And that one was max range was about 7,200 meters. So it could go pretty far. The smallest one, which was a 60 millimeter, you could either have it like mounted, which is more stable and more accurate, or you can have it handheld. And that one ranges from 1,000 meters to 3.5 or 3,500 meters about.
So, basically you're bringing.
Yeah, you can get pretty close within it, especially in a combat situation. The whole purpose, because it's a high angle trajectory, it can get over obstacles.
Is that big? The bigger mortar, is that on a vehicle or is that a carried weapon?
The 120, there was a few mounted at bases, so they just not move. But then there's also they could be mounted as well. So there are certain vehicles that would have them on the back, and then those would be computer operated. For Ranger, we generally didn't work with. We had them, and we'd have be all trained up on them, and use them if necessary. But the ones we mostly worked with were the 81 millimeter and the 60 millimeter.
So tell us about one of your missions where, just tell us about where you went, holy cow, this is the, now I'm in country, I'm in a combat environment, this is the real deal. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so my first deployment, like I was mentioning before, it was a little weird because when I was in battalion, I really use my time to be as proficient with as many systems and learn as much as possible. And fortunately, I gathered skills that some of my other peers didn't have, or they weren't technical on. And so that first deployment, I actually went to probably 5 or 6 bases all around the country, including, Bastion and all around, and Kandahar and some smaller outposts. But I was still brand new, cherry, as they say. I think even just the first mission, you train so hard, and just getting on the helicopter and going into it and doing all the things, but this time, live, where your decisions really matter. That was just a very surreal moment. And I think that fortunately I had some good leaders, and they prepared me for it. And so once you get to that point, you're worried more about disappointing your leaders and the guys around you than you are about any external dangers. And so, I was definitely nervous, but I was nervous for exactly that reason. But, everybody who's new, they trip and fall and make all sorts of mistakes and embarrass themselves. But, as long as you come home and get through it. But yeah, it was just I think just going on that helicopter the first time was just that, hey, this is real. You know, it was just that I remember having that almost self-reflective moment that was pretty profound.
Wow, thanks for sharing that too. And so, what did you see there? I mean, what were the people like? What was going on in Afghanistan?
So we had a very isolated sort of thing as opposed to what a lot of people see or what you see in the movies, because Ranger tends to be more direct action style raids and missions. So based off of intelligence, we would get some sort of word of there's a person that needs to be questioned or picked up because they might be making IEDs in the neighborhood, or they're connected to they're a general themselves in one of the terrorist organizations, or they're connected to them, or what have you. And so based off of our intelligence, working with some other special operations groups, we would go in there and try to find these people and essentially arrest them, for lack of a better term. And so in terms of our day-to-day, it wasn't like we were in the villages or we weren't necessarily interacting. We had our own specific spot and base, and we would go do very specific missions and then, hopefully come home, be successful, and then continue on. Depending on what outpost you're at, depends on the op tempo. And so, like I said, I traveled around a lot, and so it varied. Towards the end of my latter deployments, because I went in 2010, and towards the end of it was already when one of the original talks of bringing people back from Afghanistan. So at that point too, we're more focused on training troops. So Rangers were helping out some special forces outposts. And so then we had a little bit more interaction with Afghani commandos and the special operations Afghanis over there. And so that was just, training them based off of a certain protocol that we were given.
Did you guys knew the mission then?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a pretty, especially, when you're lower on the ranks, then you just, you everybody else is worried about that. But then, as I got more senior, I had more input. And then a lot of it was just making sure my guys were prepared, well trained over there. So that became its own, unique turn to the deployment of not only being responsible for myself, but being responsible for, at one point, 30 people in various locations across Afghanistan.
So if you had to do it over again, would you?
Yeah, 100%. It really made me who I am. For whatever reason, I'm very thankful that I had that intuition, that gut drive to join the military. It was what I needed. It was that coming of age, becoming a man sort of ceremonial challenge that I think is really missing in modern culture. And I think a lot of people would benefit from it. Not necessarily the military itself, but just that sort of ceremonial, that sort of challenging kind of that dynamic. And there's not really many other places that you could have the complete mental, physical, spiritual, in a lot of ways, challenge and questioning that you can find in the military. It will find, especially if you opt to go for the more challenging parts of it, special operation, it will find a way to challenge each one of those dynamics of yourself and really have you question and hopefully fortify who you are. And so, I am everything I am because of that experience. And I owe a lot to it. I owe a lot to the people and, the leaders I saw that I learned, both good and bad leaders, that I learned myself how to become a leader. I think that's the best way for people to become leaders, is that they see the good aspects of it. They see the bad aspects of it. It's almost like dating. Sometimes you have to have a few bad relationships before you find that good one and you can be healthy in it.
That's definitely a good way of looking at it. But, you touched upon something here that's pretty important. The military has a unique way, an inherent way of teaching you leadership skill sets directly and indirectly. And that's a key component, I think, to American fighting forces everywhere, is that it's that type of system that's inside the culture itself. And it is something, for those that haven't been in the military, it is, it's a language almost. And what's interesting is we can talk to anybody from really any branch of the service and from any time period. And there's that unspoken leadership type quality about it.
Yeah, and that's what, again, it was based off of intuition. I opted to enlist instead of go the officer route. Just, something I couldn't explain at that time, but makes perfect sense right now for me. And, I think that really helped me develop. It put me at the grunt level, in the dirt, in the mud with everybody else. And I really had to be with the rest of the soldiers and go up through the ranks to become a leader, as opposed to going to officer candidate school. And not knocking that, there's great officers, but for what I needed personally, I needed to go from that bottom, the very bottom basis route. But to your point too, I've traveled, a lot to many different countries since then and during that time. And there is that basic warrior archetype no matter where you go. I've found that in most countries, even if I don't speak the same language, there's this intimate sort of connection between service members. That's very cool to see when you go other places.
Yeah, you're correct about that. We have something in common. I got my degree from Florida State University, and when I went in, I was 26 years old, and of course, I was in a lot before you, but I went in as a lower enlisted and worked up through the ranks too. But I got out right before the first Gulf War, but I kind of went that route too. And I look back on it now after you describe it, and it was kind of just a different type of calling, nothing wrong with the officers, but it was kind of interesting to be a NCO with a college degree.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of cool. So you did 3 deployments in the combat zone.
Correct.
With the regiment.
Right.
That's pretty good. Well, I'm glad you made it back, and I'm sorry for any of the people that you guys may have lost. My heart definitely goes out to those guys and to you and the people that you served with. What was your transition like, and were you happy with what you got in transition?
Yeah. So, when I went in, I never really intended on it being professional soldier. I full on respect people that can go in there, stay. But I knew by the time I was getting out, I knew I got what I needed for my service, for myself, for all sorts of different things. And I knew the timing was just perfect. And at that time too, I was right when we were leaving Afghanistan. There's budget cuts, there's downsizing, there's all sorts of different pains happening. And so it just lended itself to being sort of the perfect time to transition and, discover the next chapter of my life, whatever that would be. But I knew I needed a professional side and to actually make money or make a business as well, just what I needed in my own journey. So immediately afterwards, I got out, and like everybody that gets out, there's that initial excitement. I had some money saved. And so I took advantage of the freedom and I went traveling. I went through Europe with a group of friends. I went through Asia. I stayed in Cambodia for quite a while. And that whole time was, again, just furthering the self-discovery, trying to figure out who I was post-military, which was kind of hard to shake because you still feel in that. And so I probably made a few mistakes in terms of that invincibility that comes post-military. But I was also exploring. I was trying to figure out, like, hey, if I want to be an entrepreneur, can I start a business? Like, what would this be? You always hear about those stories, especially growing up, of a guy like risking it all, going to some, random country with just $100 in his wallet and making this successful business empire. And, with my naiveness of getting out and given my background, I thought that was a little bit more possible than it was. And so I explored that. I tried to see what sort of business opportunities there were, try to start a few things in Cambodia, try to network. Was pretty unsuccessful, but just had a lot of great experiences while I was there. But at the same time, under all of that, there was definitely something looming, a growing dark cloud, I guess, that I was able to ignore by all the distraction of just traveling and being, away and abroad. And so eventually I ended up moving back to Tampa, going back into finance. I got a job with this huge international debt loss adjusters corporation. So they're in like 60 different countries, 60,000 employees. The headquarters was in Tampa, Florida. And I was fortunate enough, they were just revamping their financial analysis department because they were hitting some hard times. And so they needed sort of a new perspective on how to organize the business. And so it was almost like this entrepreneurial group within this major corporation. And so it was the good transition to, not waste my degree, go back into the finance, but without it being too oppressive, I guess, in the corporate sense.
So you're talking about this dark cloud. What's going on with that?
So and then when I was in Tampa, that's when it really started coming into my life more and more, because my life all of a sudden stopped. I became in this corporate job, even like, as I mentioned, it was a little bit more on the entrepreneurial side. It still had the corporate features. And, I was renting an apartment again. I was doing the day-to-day sort of life. Everything was slowing down. There's less distraction. And then that's when I started noticing that, I was getting a lot of anxiety attacks, sometimes super severe. I had to call into work a few times sick just because I was so anxious. That would often, devolve into a depression where I just felt the world around me was bland. There's nothing I could do to distract me. It was just this gray sort of world that I put myself in. No matter what I would try to do, I just couldn't get to this happy state. And as many veterans do, I was self-medicating pretty heavily with alcohol. I would use that as the means to even just pass the time. When you're in that depressive state, you just want to, you might not be able to get past it, but you might be able to drink yourself to a point where you can, just ignore it, at least for some point. I guess it wouldn't make matters worse, but definitely sustained it, is that I was very functional during all of it. On the outside appearance, through outside appearance, nobody would know that I was struggling in this way. It was a very internal sort of thing. And even with the drinking, I wasn't engaging in any sort of dangerous activities. I wasn't showing up to work drunk. I wasn't, drinking and driving or anything like that. But I just knew all of that were leading to just a very unhealthy lifestyle. And I knew it just took one mistake that can completely change your life,
Oh yeah. I know all about mistakes. That's what kind of changed my trajectory, was a DUI and a TBI as a result of it, that unleashed a bunch of demons, but I'm doing well now. And so tell us, where was your turning point? And then let us know, or tell us how you got the idea for the Heroic Hearts Project. Well, your turning point and the organization you represent now.
Of course. Yeah. So, I don't know if there's just one point, but as the more I was working, the more it just became worse and worse. And no matter what I tried, I tried to get back into good shape. I had a good social network. I tried to pick up cooking, exercise, meditation, everything, journaling, and it would help a little bit, but nothing would get me past that point. And as I continued with my job, it became more and more of like a corporate job and just less stimulating, less challenging. And so it was almost like the walls were coming in, because no matter, I needed to be stimulated, I needed some sort of distraction, and everything in my life was starting to prevent that. So I went to the VA. I was just like, hey, I know there's something going on. I'd appreciate to have a therapist to talk to. Maybe that, there's always some benefit to talking to somebody, especially a professional. And unfortunately, the VA at the time, not to any fault of the workers there or anything, just sort of the dynamic of this monstrous system. They said that, through their protocol, they were so overwhelmed with patients that unless I was willing to do their full complete protocol, that they really couldn't help me. They couldn't just give me somebody to talk to. I would have to be open to going on medications and the talk therapy. And I just wasn't, for myself personally, interested at all in taking any SSRIs or anything like that. I knew I could not push through it, but I didn't want to go that route for my own reasons. And I guess the turning point was I just had that, intuition. At some point, I knew I was unhappy with my job. I knew that needed to change. And I knew that eventually my habits, especially with the drinking, would just lead to some decision, some point, one of those turn points that I couldn't take back that would hurt my life in the future. And so I knew I needed to make some sort of big change. At that same time, something called ayahuasca came across my radar. I came from, sort of a generation, the DARE generation, where it was just say no. I personally viewed most drugs as, I had no issue of people smoking pot or whatever, but it was no illegal substances were for me. I generally viewed all of it as some sort of escapism, some sort of illegal activity, not interested in psychedelics at all. But what I heard about ayahuasca, I approached it with skepticism. The more I read about it, I don't know, the more it grew in my mind. And at some point it just became, hey, I need to make a decision because I need to make something change big. I don't know what it is. This seems like an option. And so for whatever reason, I guess, again, that guiding intuition, I made that decision of, hey, I got to leave my job. I'll do it respectfully. And I'm going to go to Peru to try this out. And we'll see. I'm going in there completely skeptical, but we'll see what it has to offer me. And I'm glad it did, because that, recharted my future course and brought me here to speak to you today and help. We've helped dozens of veterans since then.
Tell us about your own personal experience that first time you went down to Peru. What happened?
So as I said, I went in there extremely skeptical. I viewed psychedelics as just this escapism, bringing false, profound claims or whatever. But I was there, and so I was going to give it my all. For people who don't know what ayahuasca is, it is a combination at its core of two plants that are found in the Amazon jungle in Peru. And when you mix these two plants, one is a vine and one is a leaf. You boil it up and distill it and create this really pretty disgusting tasting drink, pretty thick, earthy drink. And when you drink that, it puts you into this psychedelic state for about 4 hours. And so you're in this psychedelic state and, viewing sort of the traditional kind of things of the shapes, patterns, colors. But they're also, which is what we've discovered now, if you put it in the right framework and mind frame, there's a lot of therapy because it can allow you to see things from different perspectives, from outside your body, from a third person perspective, or really tap into some unconscious issues that you have been ignoring that may not be easily accessible when you are in a fully conscious state. So for me, when I went there, obviously not knowing any of this, it was a very trying experience, all out war. Having never done anything like that and having a very controlling mind, the first... so it was a week time frame. You go there, you find a center, and then you participate in 4 ceremonies over the week. That's a pretty standard way of doing it. And so
before we get started on that, but let's let the listeners know that, what you describe has been going on for centuries, perhaps several thousand years. And the causal molecule in there is a DMT molecule, which is a tryptophan. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So these all of these, even what we're seeing now with psilocybin, what they call magic mushrooms, a lot of these psychedelics, they co-evolved with the human race. That most or nearly every single culture has had some sort of shamanic medicine man healer practice at their origins, and they almost always incorporated some sort of psychedelic, whether it came from mushrooms or in this case ayahuasca. And so the combination of that is something called DMT, and it's called the spirit molecule within the group because it does have this spirituality openness. A lot of people come from that, and that's not to say if you're an atheist, all of a sudden you're gonna believe in God, but you find your own spirituality in the bigger sense of the word, in terms of connectiveness, whether that's connectiveness to other people around you, connectiveness to nature, or even connectiveness to yourself of how you interplay in the world and in the system that's going on around you. So they're all very chemically similar, mushrooms and DMT, but each one has their very unique feel. And the interesting thing that researchers are finding out now is that, one, there has to be a reason that our brains respond to it. It's not an accident that these substances are the key that fit in the keyhole of the receptors in our brain. That is an evolutionary design. So there was obviously use. And you see that in the Amazon. These tribes have been doing it for millennia. It goes back to a lot of their cultural traditions. And so that's generally a lot of what we follow now, because, they've been practicing with it for quite a while, so they tend to be the experts of it.
So you went down there as a self-professed control freak trying to self-actualize. And what did you see that first episode?
For me, it was just I had the typical, as I would say, what you would view as a psychedelic experience in terms of it's a lot of patterns and geometric shapes and colors. In terms of actual images and stuff is pretty mild, but the physical part was really what got me. It was just very intense, something that I can't necessarily describe, but just this intense feeling something's wrong, I'm uncomfortable, my body temperature was all up, just I couldn't sit still. It was just, and I kept part of the dynamic of ayahuasca is a purging aspect, which sounds horrible on the outside of that you're puking, but within the ceremony, it has some sort of purpose and it actually can feel good at some points. But with this one, because it was so hard, I was just puking throughout the night and just couldn't get past it. It was my mind struggling with this substance in it without, trying to figure it out. But what I came to realize was that struggle was almost a representation of my own struggle in my mind. And this was just a more physical form of it. And so I had to figure out a way to come to terms with that if I was going to figure out how to come to terms with the issues I was dealing with in my mind. And that's kind of how a lot of this process works, is for those that are struggling through it, you're struggling for a reason. You're struggling because that is the chaos that is going on in your mind as a result of TBI, as a result of trauma.
So you had 4 journeys, so to speak, and then you came back to the States. What year was that?
No, I actually stayed abroad. So this was early 2017. I did the 4 ceremonies. The first, like I said, we're all at war, but eventually through that, I overcame it and found this really peaceful tranquility and was able to work with it. But then also my mind just felt tranquil afterwards. What I tell a lot of people is it almost felt like when you defrag a computer, there's this process where you make the computer more efficient. It felt like it did that to my brain, where it made it work more efficient, and I wasn't as subject to these depressive states or these extreme swings. And then a lot of other benefits, just, almost a complete absence of anxiety afterwards, social anxiety and other forms of anxiety, just how I reacted to stimulus before that would, get me in these states just no longer had that effect on me. And so immediately afterwards, I had left my job, as I said, and so I was just trying to figure it out. I had this profound experience. I knew it wasn't just this placebo, me convincing myself. And so that's when the idea for Heroic Hearts started to form. I continued to travel. I was in Colombia for a little bit, and that's when I started reaching out to fellow veterans in the Rangers and Special Forces, all sorts of services. And I started investigating how to make a nonprofit, how to make this work, kind of, evolving in the back of my head. And when I got a lot of positive response from other veterans, that's when I had to make the decision and make that leap of faith of like, hey, I've experienced this sort of thing, and I think it can help a lot of my friends. And they at least deserve to know that this is out there, and then they can make their appropriate choice. And given my background, especially in finance and some business, I knew I had the ability to make this something viable. And so at that point, it was almost this obligation of like, hey, you have the means, you have the knowledge, and you can help people. So there is an obligation for you to pursue this to its utmost. So that's when I started in April 1st. So pretty close to 3-year anniversary right now. The Heroic Hearts project, I incorporated it, started the nonprofit paperwork. And this was all in like a small internet cafe in the middle of nowhere in Colombia.
That's awesome, man. What a great story. So tell me the types of programs. We're getting ready to go towards the last segment of the show, but tell us, the listeners, about the programs, and can you tell us one or two success stories that you all have had?
Yeah, of course. So, at the core, like I said, we're not, proselytizing it. We're not trying to make converters. We're not trying to force psychedelics on people that don't want it, but we're trying to offer a resource to those veterans that come to us, that come to this point where they've tried a lot of other therapy modalities and without success, they want to try something different. Or, they're just at that point of life and they heard about this. So at the core, it's this, we offer information, we offer connections to centers that do it in a way we deem as safe and that will help the veteran. Because everybody has, there's a lot of different traditions, especially now there's more economic incentive to create centers in various places. So we just want to ensure that people are doing it right and not just to make another dollar, and especially to protect veterans, because obviously the last thing any one of us want to do, including yourself, is cause more harm to our brothers and sisters who have served. So we have partnerships with various centers around the world. We provide financial scholarships because a lot of veterans are, especially those suffering from mental trauma, tend to need more financial support. So for instance, somebody comes to us, they fill out our application, they tell us about themselves, what they're struggling with, if they need financial support. When we have donations and the funding, we will organize retreats with certain centers. So we'll get a group of veterans, we'll vet them, we'll make sure they're healthy, make sure there's no risks there. We'll gather the money necessary for it. We'll provide those scholarships and then connect them, providing all the logistics, make sure they get to these centers. The centers will do what they've been doing for a while with the help of these traditions, the indigenous shaman. And then on the tail end, once the veterans come back and hopefully have pretty profound experiences, then we continue the support as much as possible. So we provide coaching beforehand to prepare them. And then our coaches will follow up with these veterans to help them in something called integration, which is, this psychedelic can be, it's pretty unusual. Most of us are not used to it, and it can bring a lot of revelations, a lot of new insights, a lot of metaphorical answers that you might not know the meaning of. And a lot of the process afterwards is figuring out how to incorporate these things into your life to set you up for success. And that's really what we emphasize with all of this, is it really takes a lot of work on the individual. This is not a magic pill. It's not for everybody. But if you put in a lot of work before and afterwards, it can really change your life, give you a leg up on, give you that extra boost to get past the demons, get past the dark clouds. But it does take that follow-up. It does take, like anything in the military, you have to make, your plan. You have to design it, and then you have to follow through with it. If there are changes and things you don't expect, then you have to have contingency plans as well. It's the same thing with everybody's mental health of, hey, you say you're going to go back to the gym, but how can we hold you accountable? So this is not a New Year's resolution. How can we make sure that you maintain the enthusiasm you have right now?
Yeah, I like the fact that you don't push it on people because, and you're totally right, it isn't for everybody. And, Jesse, that what you pointed out here is that anything in life is going to take work. You have to do the work, and introspection, self-introspection and self-improvement is probably the tough work that any of us as a human being will ever do.
Yeah, exactly. And that's this just it's a tool. That's what we always tell people. And, ayahuasca is one. We've worked with other psychedelics and other modalities as well. Our whole thing is just connect veterans to effective therapy. Right now, psychedelics tend to be leading the charge on that because they even in the research that we're doing right now are well above the effectiveness of any SSRI or medication or traditional talk therapy. We do this in contingency to talk therapy, and that's a multiplier. But psychedelics right now, you're seeing with psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine. They are providing these tools to veterans and the rest of humanity that with success rates that we haven't seen at all. And so it's definitely becoming a revolution in mental health.
Tell us about one success story that you all have had with Heroic Hearts.
So I'll tell you, recently we had a guy named Rudy who was a Green Beret and then has done a lot of stuff, was a sniper instructor, and just, a very imposing figure, very tall, very big guy. When I first met him, we did a retreat with him in Costa Rica, and you could tell he was like regretting his decision, like, what the hell am I doing here? What did I sign up for? Just a man of few words. And he went through the experience, and you could tell he was, but under the surface, struggling with a lot of stuff. And even just after the first and second ceremony, just this complete alteration, this complete transition in who he was. I guess that's the wrong. He was still the same Rudy, but it was almost, like a sports car that got a lot of dust and grime on it. And it's still, you could tell it's the sports car, it's the Mustang, but it's not until you wash away all that grime that you really see like how spectacular and preserved it was. And so that was the same thing of like him in this process completely revitalized him, changed his life. And he later, told me a story that it was weird interacting with his wife. She was a little bit uncertain at first, but he had been with him since college, and she said that he almost changed the pre-military Rudy. He still had the good aspects and the discipline and all that. It wasn't this change, but he had that life in him. He had that humor, that ability to fool around a little bit. And he told me a story of, I was on the phone call with him, and he was just talking about everything, and he said this unique thing happened yesterday where he woke up early with his kid, his 10-year-old son, and they're making pancakes, and he was just enjoying it. And his kid ended up a little bit late for school, and he was saying that like in the past, because he was so military centric, he would have like freaked out and got upset of like, no, we can't have my kid miss the bus. He needs to go there. This is the timeline. But this time post ayahuasca, he was just like, hey, I'm making pancakes with my kid. This is awesome. We can catch another bus. I can get him there. It's not the worst thing in the world. And he just really found absolute joy in that moment. And so stories like that are amazing because that's the ability of a person to recapture the joy in life, which, life is hard as we see now. There's a lot of ups and downs, but there is this, we are very lucky to be alive, and there are these magical moments that if we, really take the time to focus on, that's the meaning of life right there. Enjoying these small moments, these small pockets of joy that can help us get through these hard times.
No doubt. Let me ask you this: what does freedom mean to you?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think that's always like a moving spectrum. And I think freedom, especially with what I'm operating, is the freedom to do what you need to do to protect yourself and your family, as long as it's not negatively impacting the lives of others, right? So, for instance, with this, I do believe that veterans should have the right to heal themselves through this dynamic. They should have the right to regain their health, their sanity, even if people are a little bit skeptical of it, as long as it's not hurting anybody else. I can understand, anger around somebody taking meth because then they're going to rob and steal and possibly become violent or whatever. And that's understandable. You don't want to be in that situation. But something like this, which is nobody's hurting anybody else, I think that is a freedom that is denied to us right now. Me personally, and I'm sure you are the same, there's not, even if it's illegal, there's not somebody that is going to prevent me from protecting myself and my family, right? So, and that goes to mental health, that goes to every sort of thing. So even if the laws change, I'm going to protect these things that are in my close circle. I'm not going to inhibit anybody else's rights, but something like this that's as passive as me, in the U.S. doing something illegal to regain my life, I have zero issue with doing that.
Well, that's, definitely a conviction that means a lot, because I don't think there's any greater service at a uniform than when you can actually help somebody, regain their dignity, regain their self-respect, their self-esteem, their health, their mental health. I mean, it's definitely a valiant mission. Not for everybody, I get that, but your approach is definitely not recreational. It's all therapeutic. How can people find out more information about Heroic Hearts Project?
So, we have a website, heroicheartsproject.org. You can easily Google search ayahuasca, psychedelics, veterans will come up pretty quickly. We're on all the social medias. Our main one is Instagram. Again, just search Heroic Hearts Project. As I mentioned before, we are a nonprofit. All of our ability to help veterans comes directly out of the kindness of others, people donating money, people donating time. We have an ambassadors program. So even if people, don't have the money to help, they can help by donating time, help by donating their skill set. So, from wherever you can help, reach out to us through those means and, help us save more veteran lives.
Well, Jesse, let me ask you this, man. Do you have a personal mantra that you live by every day?
I wouldn't, nothing in concise words, but it's always, my issue is getting too far ahead of myself. So as much as I can on a day-to-day basis, bring it into the present. What can I do right now? What should I be appreciative now? Just as whatever questions bring me back to where I am right now to appreciate it. That is my daily mantra. There's like this one show of, one of the characters said it's unfortunate that the good old day, you don't realize that they're the good old days until they've already passed, right? And so as trouble and trying as some days can be, I'm very fortunate to be in this work and do this. And, I really want to try to take advantage of that and appreciate it in the moment.
That's awesome, Jesse. I just really appreciate you sharing with us your story today and, ways that you continue on with the mission to help humanity. And for the listeners out there, we've been having a great conversation with United States Army Ranger veteran Jesse Gould, who's the founder and president of the Heroic Hearts Project, which is an organization on a mission to help people regain their lives. And we respect you and we support everything that you do. And all I can say is drive on. I could say Fido, but you're doing great things. So we can't go there, but you're going there. And if there's anything we can do, Green Zone Hero, Straight Outta Combat Radio, to get the word out, I got to tell you, Jesse, we got your 6.
I appreciate it, John. And, thank you so much for your help and pleasure talking with you. But, thank you for helping us spread our message and sharing this with your audience.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Jesse.
Have a good one. Stay safe, stay healthy.
You gotta light 'em up before they burn it down.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Straight Outta Combat Radio, audio medicine from Green Zone Hero. If you liked what you heard, then tell others about us. Like us and download us. And please remember, freedom is not free, and combat veterans are vital assets. They're not broken.
Save us all before they burn it down.